No matter your profession, learning to use a new application to do your job can be a painful experience. Yes, the software you're currently using has all kinds of weird quirks and problems, especially if it's PowerPoint or Dreamweaver. Man, have you ever used Dreamweaver? It's awful. It's just awful. But the thing about these problems is that over time, you learn to overcome them, and eventually, you develop quite a bit of speed. Things are fine. You can work well enough at what you have, and yes, some of it is a little annoying, but life's not perfect. And then along comes some game changer that everyone keeps talking about. Oh, it's so much better. Oh, you still using that old thing? It's so out of date, so inefficient, blah blah blah. Now, if the app is Dreamweaver, those people have a point. I just can't stress how much I hate Dreamweaver. But often the process of moving to the new thing is really, really painful, and you just end up with a whole bunch of new problems to overcome. This all boils down to one question. How much suffering is involved, and is the change worth that suffering? It's a two-part question. Now, in the world of composition, the industry leader, Sibelius, is the ultimate trial by fire. Understanding it is a bit like learning to drive a new route to work while blindfolded. Your experience and intuition aren't going to help you. Instead, you need to rely on brute force trial and error by simply crashing into everything around you in order to piece together a mental construct of what's going on, with your primary guides being abstract causality and pain. It should be renamed Pavlovius. So, for all of us who've had to endure the process of divining the mechanics of Sibelius, we don't want to do it again. We're survivors. Yeah, it's a nightmare to learn. It took me years to get good at it, but despite the awful interface, it is actually quite powerful, and eventually, you get to be pretty quick at it too. It's fine. Leave it. It's fine. But it's not fine. Not anymore, because there's a new app on the scene. A direct competitor hell-bent on running those Sibelius folk out of town. Who are you? I'm Jank Man, and you're going to be seeing me a little later. Whee! Oh my god!
Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in to today's live stream about Dorico 3. My name is Daniel Spreadbury.
This is Daniel Spreadbury. He's pretty much the spokesperson of Dorico. And to begin looking at what he and the rest of his team have built, let's go back a few years to 2012, when the majority of that team were working on a different notation app called, Sibelius. Right, I've already spoken about this once before, so let's recap quickly. Sibelius was bought by a multimedia company called AVID in 2006. Daniel Spreadbury and the rest of the Sibelius team were based in Finsbury Park in London at the time. But a few years after they purchased Sibelius, AVID ran into some financial trouble with their share price tanking at the end of 2011. So, as part of an emergency cost-saving measure, they decided to let the Finsbury Park team go and began recruiting a new and much cheaper team in the Ukraine. Then, 3 years later, the Ukraine team seems to have not worked out, and Sibelius started advertising for yet another development team in Montreal. As Tim Carroll, AVID's vice president for audio products, explained, it became clear that in order to move forward, we needed to have a specific skill set for our main development team. Excellent developer skills, plus both a background and passion for the art of music notation. Or to put it another way, it turns out we needed the people we fired. The closing of the Finsbury Park office caught the attention of Yamaha, who saw an opportunity. You see, AVID's revenue has been slowly declining for years now, with its two other moneymakers, Pro Tools and Media Composer, facing increasingly stiff competition. Sibelius, on the other hand, is still solidly the industry standard for notation and has a pretty firm footing in the education space too, which makes it difficult to displace. And since it integrates with Pro Tools, it's attractive to those who write music for movies or TV, or who want to convert their scores into highly produced audio tracks. However, for those bought into the Sibelius Pro Tools ecosystem, there are some cause for concern. Are AVID destined to continue this trajectory of decline? And if so, given that they were willing to massively halt its development once, would they do it again? Is Sibelius safe? Well, Yamaha are also asking this question. They own a company called Steinberg, who in turn own Cubase, a direct competitor to Pro Tools. And since they're obviously always looking for a way to give Cubase an edge, when AVID decided to ditch the Finsbury Park team in 2012, they saw an opportunity. Here, offered up in a platter, was a group of people with the experience to develop a rival notation program which could integrate with Cubase and together could be poised to step in as the new industry standard if AVID's fortunes continued to deteriorate. Dorico was never going to suddenly take over from Sibelius. No, there's a longer game being played here. So before we go any further, you might be wondering why I've not yet mentioned the other two major notation apps, Finale and MuseScore. Well, with regards to Finale, which is still Sibelius' main rival, I'm saving it for last, and I don't want to give the game away by talking about it now. Regarding MuseScore, well, that's a bit more of an interesting one actually, and if you haven't already heard the news about this, I guess you'll be pretty surprised. So, after I created my video about MuseScore in March 2019, the open source community set about fixing all the issues I had mentioned. I was quite impressed and honoured by this, and over time I found myself regularly talking to them about the specifics of certain fixes. Eventually I started submitting proper designs too, and as I got more involved I discovered that I got along really well with the team. So one thing led to another, we started holding hands, we dated for a while, and on the 5th of November 2019 finally decided to tie the knot and I became MuseScore's new head of design. I know, what a match! So now that I'm actively working on the design of MuseScore, I feel there are two obvious questions I should quickly address. First, what does this mean for the Tantacrul channel? Well, in terms of output, nothing. If I do cover my work on MuseScore here in the future, it'll only be when I think the subject is interesting enough for a general audience, and I'll largely be documenting my design work over on the MuseScore channel instead. So for anyone interested in following that progress, the link is in the description. The second question that I imagine this will raise is whether or not my involvement with MuseScore will bias my appraisal of Dorico or Finale. I mean, it's a fair question, and it's probably worth describing my own motivations here. I joined MuseScore so I could put my money where my mouth is, to design a notation app to be the way I think it should be, and the last thing I want to do in pursuit of that goal is to start engaging in cringeworthy us and them corporate tribalism of the Steve Ballmer variety.
Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine.
If I start failing to recognize the good work of those around me, how good is my work going to be? So I'm going to proceed exactly as I have before. When I see something I like, I'll say so, and when I see something janky, I'm going to mercilessly mock it as always. And as you watch this video, you can judge for yourselves whether you think I'm being fair or not. And with all that said, let's get back into it. The Dorico team have a tendency to irritate those who currently work on Sibelius, and it's not hard to see why. Nearly every article about Dorico or interview with one of their team members will mention the Finsbury Park incident, although, to be fair, it's hard to see how that subject can be avoided. But that's not all. Sibelius seems to come up a lot when team members describe the design of Dorico 2, with the sentiment being, look how badly they do things. I've linked to a few examples of this in the description. The funny thing about this, though, is that since they are the old Sibelius team, then they're to a significant degree responsible for this badness. Bear in mind, by the way, that this is the team who brought us the awful ribbon design with Sibelius 7, a legacy that the current Sibelius team are rather unfairly saddled with. So with that said, what is this video going to focus on? Well, I've spent the last 8 months using Dorico properly, and like my previous music software videos, I think it offers up a lot of interesting lessons about the challenges of creating music software, and I've made sure to focus on aspects I've not spoken about before. For those who can't read music, this video should still be pretty straightforward to understand. For those interested in my overall assessment of Dorico, I'm going to be putting it head to head against Sibelius to see which is better, and as I go through this video, I'm going to answer the crucial question, which would I pick to write music in? So as I mentioned earlier, Dorico spends a lot of time positioning itself as a more elite notation program than Sibelius, and they reinforce this message constantly in interviews, tutorials, press releases and blog posts. The look and layout of the app tries to convey this message too, sometimes literally. I mean, the very first thing you see when you open Dorico is the tagline, Advanced Music Notation System. Advanced. The UI is dark by default, which reminds me of a design adage, use white if you want to look easy and non-threatening, use black if you want to look pro. They claim to be intuitive and simple to use, so I was curious to see what they'd done to improve upon the Sibelius model, and to help me answer this, I decided to try something I've not done before on this channel. In October 2019, I sent out a call on Patreon, YouTube and Twitter asking experienced musicians to help me do some user testing. After receiving hundreds of responses, I chose 25 people who'd never used Dorico before. and asked them to 1. Download and install the trial version, and 2. Try writing a few bars of music using whatever instruments and styles they were comfortable with.
I am quite comfortable using Sibelius. I've never used Dorico before, though I've been really excited to try.
So now I'm stuck at this point where I need more bars. It's killing me.
This is the ultimate test for any application, the first time user test. It doesn't indicate how good an app is once you've learned it, and we'll definitely get to that later, but it does directly test how intuitive it is. And for anyone interested, these sessions typically lasted about an hour. So why did I focus on this type of testing? Well, firstly, this is a video about design, and I wanted to show one of the tools designers use to validate their work. Secondly, the first time user test is extremely important to pass for any app competing in a crowded market. Why? Well, because when people decide to install your free trial, that's your opportunity to convince them that it's worth making the jump from what they are currently using to what you are offering. And every complication, every bit of jank they encounter along the way during this crucial period is more likely to convince them that it's just not worth doing. And in Dorico's case, considering that it's aggressively targeting Sibelius and Finale users, a bad first-time experience is really hurtful to their chances. Also, this is the best test you can use to determine if something is well designed, because every time an app requires you to consult the manual to figure out how to do something, especially when other apps already make that thing easy, it's not doing a particularly good job. Now, the experience of those I recorded largely matched my own first-time experience, which is mixed, and in places pretty painful. So strap in, people, because even though there's a lot of good stuff to discuss later, we first need to talk about the setup process. Okay. Are you ready for the pain? Right, to begin using a trial of Dorico 3, you need to create a Steinberg ID by entering your email and password, and right off the bat we have a usability issue. The title says sign in or create your Steinberg ID, and at the bottom you have what looks like a confirm button. Now, most people foolishly understood this to mean that you should enter your email here and your password there and press create Steinberg ID. Lovely, and you'll need to fill that out again. For what it's worth, most participants did this step before speaking to me, so I only saw it happen 4 times, and out of those 4 times, 3 people made this mistake. And once you've registered, they email you a code which just about everyone copies.
I cannot paste in here.
Then, after hitting the redundant continue button, you're taken to this doozy. Confirm newsletter subscription, with the following options: cancel or confirm. Watching people encountering this step was pretty amusing.
What?
There is no choice.
What type of trial is this?
It just rubs me the wrong way. I'm not a fan, because obviously the first thing I'm going to do is unsubscribe.
Then they send you an activation code which contains hidden curse words, and you also get your download link. You're 1 step away. I should probably tell you at this point that you're nowhere near 1 step away. You're like 20% way through this. So the download link doesn't actually download Dorico, instead you get the Steinberg Download Assistant, a landing page which finally allows you to download Dorico along with the orchestral libraries that come with it. And when installing the Download Assistant, it asks you whether you want to install something called the Aria 2 Download Manager, a download manager which they explain makes your Download Assistant work better. Anyway, once that's all set up, you can finally click on Dorico 3 to download it. Once installed, you click on the Dorico icon to open it, and it tells you no license found, which is one of those messages that makes you think, oh no, I've done something wrong. Click enter activation code to launch eLicenser Control Center and enter your activation code. And there's a button, which, when pressed, opens a program called the eLicenser, which it turns out they installed on your machine without telling you, and if you're on Windows, they also auto-created a desktop shortcut too. Okay, looks like you got some spring cleaning to do after this. So you go back to your email, grab your activation code and enter it, then you press activate license only to be told that the eLicenser is out of date. What? But hold on, I just installed it. How did I mess this up? Now, a few people didn't know what to do at this point, and it's worth mentioning that this was experienced universally by every person I spoke to, and it took some of them a long time to realise that the only solution to this problem is to follow the address mentioned in the error message here, www.elicenser.net, and they don't even make it a link. It would be nice, if that was a link so I didn't have to type it out. So then you download the latest version of the eLicenser. Thanks for nothing, Steinberg Download Assistant. And then you install it and, oh what now? Applications still active on this computer are using the eLicenser software. Please close these applications and then continue installing by clicking retry. So guess which application is causing the issue? That's right, it's Dorico. The program that launched the eLicenser in the first place is now preventing it from working. What's the opposite of seamless? Seamful? Okay, so that was a train wreck. At this point I should mention that I started off interviewing 28 people, and 3 of them dropped out specifically because this installation was too awkward for them. Of the 25 remaining people, only 3 described it as straightforward. Okay, to be fair, this is the Steinberg team in Hamburg's doing, not the Dorico team in London. At the moment, this tacked together series of mishaps is hobbling the first time experience of Dorico. Anyway, let's leave that all behind and open Dorico up. Advanced! And we're brought to the Steinberg hub, which is fine. A bit disorganized and fugly. I particularly love this vile green button over here. This is a classic UI trick. If people don't notice an important button, just make it more horrible. And Dorico, can we talk about this? Coldplay. You're angling to be the creme de la creme of notation apps and you're leading with Coldplay? Oh, and it's that song, Clocks, the one where they discovered arpeggios. Who is your audience for this? I mean, if you had a pop song by, I don't know, David Bowie, let's just create a little Venn diagram here. I can see there being a lot of crossover with Dorico users, but if we were to change it to people who have a rudimentary understanding of music and people who like Coldplay, I think, let's just push those out a bit. Yeah, that feels about right. Coldplay. Seriously, you may as well have led with Chocolate Rain. But all that aside, now at least we're in Dorico. Although, we're still not really done with the installation because next comes the audio setup. Like many other composers who write for live ensembles, I'm a diehard fan of the orchestral emulator Note Performer, which I could go on about at length. Note Performer can be easily set up as the default sound library in both Sibelius and Finale, but with Dorico it's a different story. So first you go to the play category and press this plus button under the empty VST instruments panel. Then I can pick Note Performer from the drop-down, which in turn triggers a pop-up that's been built specifically to explain what to do, because there's no way you'd ever figure it out. So I have to go to Play and choose Note Performer from the playback template. And what's this hieroglyphic? Is it a sound wave or something? Show factory. That's meant to be a factory? Hey guys, the deadline is today and we need a factory icon pronto! Yeah, no problem, leave it to me. I'll just make the door and the 2 things and the thing and factory. Next, I have to go to a completely different place to make that template work by default. Even then, if you press play, it might not work, so it tells you specifically that you have to rewind it to the beginning first and then press play. This is a novel way to fix usability bugs. Just don't fix them and provide an inbuilt pop-up that tells you how to work around it. By the way, I'm making this seem way more straightforward and linear than it was. I spent a lot of time working all this out, especially because the play option up here is only available when you're in the play category, a really opaque clutter-saving technique. So what would be the ideal here? Well, how about when Dorico is opened, it searches for Note Performer, and if it finds it, it triggers the following pop-up. We see you have Note Performer installed, would you like to activate it for this project? And then simply provide them with an option to set it as the default right there too. And as for that last step, the one where I have to rewind to the start first, since none of the competition does that, I think Dorico should fix whatever they need to fix to stop it from happening. They can't claim to be an intuitive app if they require 4 steps to do what Sibelius can accomplish in 1. And just to finish up with this, for anyone thinking of installing the trial version, I should probably issue these 2 warnings. First, Dorico by default likes to hog all the audio for itself, preventing other apps that make sound from working properly. This caused me quite a few headaches during user testing because the act of booting up Dorico caused our video conference calls to crash. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but I can no longer hear you. Not cool, Dorico. The setting to turn this off is in Preferences, Play, then scroll down to turn off this miserable little tick box. You're welcome. Secondly, if you try to open Dorico before your sound library is installed, it will default to something called Dorico Beep, which is a basic sampler that is so distorted and set to such an insanely loud volume that it might take your head off if you're not careful. Watch this poor unsuspecting soul pressing play in Dorico for the first time with headphones on.
Coldplay clacks. Alright, and I'm just gonna press play. Holy sh**.
So next up, our testers needed to set up their score by choosing the instruments they wanted to write for. Now all the major players provide an instruments pop-up which allows you to do this right away. Makes sense. But the Dorico team have altered this idea a little by introducing the concept of players. which are meant to represent the actual people who'll be playing the piece, with each player needing to be assigned their own instrument. This is reminiscent of an old app from the 90s called Igor Engraver, which had a similar list called Musicians. There are good reasons for doing this. First, it provides a framework that allows you to assign more than one instrument to an individual player. For example, if you have a percussionist in charge of multiple instruments, you can set that up here. This is also structurally useful too. By creating this identifiable list, which is a set not of instruments but of the people who are holding those instruments, they've unlocked some very powerful score creation and layout possibilities, which we'll get to shortly. But the drawback of this system is that it creates a complication that makes the process of setting up a score more cumbersome and difficult to understand. First, it forces new users to have to engage with the awkward concept of having an empty-handed player in their project, which I watched stress a few people out.
I didn't understand it and it got in the way, and it's only when I'm watching this video back that I now understand where I went wrong.
Another problem I saw was the following. After you choose an instrument, the instrument panel closes. Oh, what do you do now? Well, a lot of people look at these hieroglyphics down here. Person, people, mecha rainbow, CD rack, and understandably steer clear of them. So instead, a lot of people clicked on this pretty inviting plus button here, since it's the thing that best describes their intention. I want to add something. The problem is that by doing this, you're actually assigning this player another instrument, which is a concept first-time users don't yet understand.
What happened to the violin and piano? Because it seems like I only have trumpet on my score.
Yeah, apparently I'm doing something wrong.
Another issue this creates is that it makes the process of setting up a non-standard orchestral ensemble much slower than Finale or Sibelius. With Finale, for example, when I want to start a new project, a dialog appears where I can quickly choose all my instruments by pressing this Add button, which are automatically arranged into a sensible default ordering, woodwinds at the top, strings at the bottom, etc. With Dorico, the concept of needing to add a player first before assigning them an instrument slows things down, and since this dialog keeps disappearing after you add players, you very quickly find yourself wondering, is there a way I can add multiple players and not have to do this one by one? And then you look down here and you'd be forgiven for thinking that this is the option that allows you to do that. Nope, this is something called a section player, which refers to a section of musicians all reading from the same staff, like a string section. So this is a further complication. We're no longer just looking at a list of players, it's a list of players where one of them is itself a group of more players. So if you want to add multiple players who all play different instruments, that's what the mecha rainbow is for. The icon is meant to be an ensemble seating chart, by the way. Congrats if you figured that out. But even this is inflexible, only allowing you to choose from a few types of grouping.
I'm gonna try and do a piano quintet. Okay, I guess it doesn't do quintets by default.
For the orchestral piece I wrote in Dorico, I wanted 2 alto sax and 1 tenor sax, which I could kind of get, along with a bunch of additional instruments I didn't want. So I added this list, then deleted all the unneeded instruments, then added the missing second alto sax player. No big deal, but it does feel quite slow compared to the competition. And by the time I'd finished, the instruments were arranged completely incorrectly too, so I had to drag them around into a sensible order manually. Not to mention, after I'd finished adding instruments, look at the state of the score. So again, unlike Sibelius, which automatically tries to pick a sensible default layout, I have to now go on the hunt for the settings which allow me to change the staff and paper size. Here's another minor annoyance that can be illustrated by watching this user coming to grips with instrument setup. He's now trying to delete some unwanted players, and this annoying dialogue keeps popping up each time to ask whether he wants to delete the player or the player and the part layouts. But the thing is, he's only trying to delete an empty-handed player, so any parts assigned to them are going to be empty. It feels like a fairly unnecessary and semi-abstract question to be presenting him with at this moment. Here's another user engaging with this dialogue for the first time who opted only to delete the player because the options being put in front of him aren't clear.
Yeah, there's no music written yet, so that's fine, can delete that one.
As a consequence, he now has an orphaned part over here that's going to cause some confusion down the road. Oh man, I haven't even got to this panel yet. Right, let's mosey on over here. So this list on first glance looks like the same thing, but no, let me quickly explain what it is. This is the layouts panel, which is a list of the scores and part scores that have been auto-generated as you were adding players over here. This is also a concept from Igor Engraver, which has been reimagined in Dorico. And let me be clear here, this idea is great. The Dorico team were right to take inspiration from Igor, but their version does involve some very unusual behaviour. For example, if I click on the flute player over here, we can see tick boxes in the layout panel on the right. which are showing the scores where the flute is being applied. In this case, the full score and the individual flute part. And if I want the flute to be added to anything else, I can just tick it. For example, I've now added the flute player to this oboe part. Okay so far. But now if I click on a score in this list, the arrangement reverses. Now the score is selected and these instruments become tick boxes, which basically means that there are two reversed ways of doing the same thing. It's really strange, especially because the panels are on either side of the screen, so it's not visually obvious they're connected in any way, and you have to keep ping-ponging back and forth to understand the relationship between them. And this setup has some other weird knock-on effects too, like if you arrange the instruments into a sensible order on one side, the other side doesn't follow suit. So the connections are all over the place. Look, bassoon 1 over here, bassoon 2 over here, horn all the way down here. The shame about this is the options being provided are really powerful because you can create as many variations of parts as you want. Like if you're writing for piano trio and the cellist tells you they want to see the piano in their part score, you could just click on the piano and add it to the cello score right away. Or click on the cello score and add to the piano, whatever. But as I said earlier, when you arrive at the app for the first time, all of this, all these bizarre icons and interrelationships smack you in the face at once. It's baffling. And don't even get me started about this down here. Flows, a way of creating sections or movements or variations. I don't want to get into it too much right now. It's another nice idea which, when clicked on, reveals, oh no, a three-way relationship. Ah! And what I find particularly strange about this whole setup page is that, despite having an entire section devoted to setting up your score, it's missing some really essential stuff like staff and paper size, which you'll remember from a moment ago you're definitely going to have to edit if you're creating an orchestral score. Oddly, if I expand one of these, you can see the page size referenced, but you can't actually edit it. Why? You can look, but you can't touch. So if you want to change these settings, you have to right-click here and choose Layout Options to open this dialog box. If you change a layout size, you have to then close the dialog and navigate to the score itself to see the effect of the changes you've made. This is particularly jarring because Sibelius does this much better. Look, I can change the staff size here and the score updates accordingly. Overall, the interconnectedness of this system is not obvious at all, and the only way to learn it is to watch a lot of tutorial videos. And just so you know, as a designer, you generally want to avoid that, especially for core functionality. For this kind of stuff, every time the user needs to consult the manual, it is kind of a failure of design. The system is very clever, but also inelegant and quite cumbersome. And as a result, Dorico is not an app that suddenly clicks, it's an app that slowly dawns on you over time. So, regarding score setup, are these pain points unavoidable? Does the inclusion of all these clever ideas mean that the app has to naturally be harder to learn? Well, I'm sure it won't surprise you to find out that I think the answer is no. I think some of this information could be sequenced so that the user isn't hit with all of it at once. We have a structural problem to solve first. This interconnected ping-pong layout is hampering the ability to provide other useful settings and is also causing the players panel to be overcomplicated, especially the way you have to keep reopening the same dialogue. When you have to keep doing that, it may as well be a dialogue. So let's remove players from here, and instead, when a user starts a new project, we'll show a dialogue that places the instruments on the left and the players on the right. Now, anyone coming from one of the competitor apps, which is the audience Dorico is targeting by the way, will know exactly what the deal is. You can select instruments and add them quickly. And each time you do this, a new player is automatically created, allowing us to discard the confusing concept of an empty-handed player. And if you want to add more instruments to the same player, or change the instrument they are holding, you can drag them into these slots. This would allow you to change instruments later too. And regarding the ordering, you'll notice that the instruments have been organized sensibly by default, and you can still drag to rearrange them if you want. And once you've finished, you can close this dialog, and then you're left with just one list, which is the list of parts. Why would I do this? Well, let me demonstrate. First, if you click on a part, now the appropriate score appears in front of you, and if you want to edit the number of players in that score, they can be immediately accessed from this subordinate list where the relationship between players and parts is much clearer. Moreover, now that you have this pattern, you can use tabs to expose useful common settings like staff and page sizes. The difference is, unlike the existing dialog box where you change these values, the score updates to reflect them immediately. All in all, a much friendlier system. The information is sequenced sensibly, options are exposed when you need them, and crucially, you can see the effect of the changes you make to the settings. Not to mention, because we've decluttered the page, it's less likely to make your head spin and you can see more of the score. There are a few more bits of hooking up to do, like making the player's dialogue easy to find and connecting it to flows, etc. Those are fairly straightforward to solve using similar solutions. I think you get the idea, so let's move on. Now finally we get to the part where our testers were ready to write some music. Everything we've been looking at so far was contained in the Setup tab, but in order to write music you now need to move over to the Write tab. And when you do this, the app changes significantly for the better. Gone are the esoteric interconnected lists, and instead appears what looks like a pretty sensible and intuitive layout. This was my first impression when I used Dorico, and the people I tested largely agreed. Here's one person describing the layout after seeing it for the first time.
This looks nice and simple. First impression is pretty good. Got my note input on the left-hand side, other stuff on the right-hand side. Seems nice and clean, I like that.
If you're a designer, it's exactly what you want to hear. He doesn't know precisely what he'll find on either side of the page, but he has a pretty good idea of the general organisation without having to think too deeply about it. This side is concerned with writing music, this side contains markings and techniques that you can apply to that music. And when you select stuff on the score, you can choose a few contextual options down here. This time around, there doesn't appear to be any interconnected functionality on either side of the score. Any linked controls, like these two parts, are situated beside each other, which helps, and the connection was obvious to everyone I tested. And there's some lovely visual and organisational subtlety here too. In this panel, they've laid out the most common note durations, accidentals and articulations with clear separator lines that make it very easy to read. I also really like this panel on the right. Each collection of elements is represented by a clear icon, and the contents of each section is organised in a way that makes it really intuitive, and it works in lots of different ways too. For example, if you're the kind of person who likes to click on something first and then apply it, you can. Or if you prefer to select the destination first and make your selection afterwards, you can do that too. And the impact this design finesse had on first-time usage was evident. No one failed to figure out how to apply things to the score, and with a few exceptions, people generally didn't get lost once they got to this page. I also really like how many extended techniques and modern notation concepts you find here. Not only is it convenient, but also educational for new composers, and I wouldn't be surprised if many people ended up discovering and using these techniques simply by virtue of exploring this app. There is one quite painful issue I'd love to see addressed, which is how hard they make it to add bars when you get started. You see, when you start a new project, you get what looks like one bar. What you don't realise is that this isn't really a bar at all, it's infinite. And no matter how many notes you add, you can never get to a new bar. Moreover, you can't create a new bar despite there being a very clear option for it. So the trick here is to add a time signature first. Unless you figured that out, you're going nowhere. Why they don't disable this button when it doesn't do anything is beyond me. Better yet, why not just ask them to specify a time signature at that point? Half the people I tested had this specific issue, and I can't understand why they don't smooth it out. Now, this complaint might make experienced users groan, but it's a first-time user trap. It is logical, but you only see that logic when you're on the other side of the problem. And another consequence of this is that when users first try to enter some notes, the fact that this really is an infinite bar causes the subdivision markings to function quite poorly and results in the user accidentally entering wrong note values. It's an awful first experience if you don't think to add a time signature at the outset.
Didn't ask for quavers. I asked for crotchets.
So suddenly, this changed to a different note. I didn't want this note.
Now, in saying all of this, I shouldn't gloss over the fact that this initial state you find yourself in is actually a very permissive system if you want to write music that's free of any meter, which for many composers interested in modern techniques from the 20th or 21st century is a big deal. And what's more, it's been built to work this way, unlike Sibelius, where any free metered solution always feels like a hack. However, I think the option to write free metered music should be opt-in and certainly not the default. But definitely kudos to the Dorico team for building a system that facilitates it. If you're interested in learning more about this, I've put a link to a relevant tutorial in the description below. Okay, I should probably address this faint grey rectangle you see everywhere. Oh, you know what, let's not right now. Let's just pop it down here and we'll get to it later. So with all that said, what's it like writing music on the score? Well, regarding basic note input, it works in a pretty standard way. You click on a note value and enter it on the score, or you can enter notes using a computer keyboard or MIDI keyboard. In addition, they provide a marking above the stave that describes how the beat is subdivided. So far, so good. But once you look a little closer, Dorico's system does some very strange things, and it can't simply be explained by listing out each feature in isolation because here, again, they've linked together certain functionalities for reasons that are initially tricky to understand. It all seems to hang on one or two hard rules which seem like lines in the sand that they refuse to cross, with the rest of the interaction model being a collection of workarounds that solve the awkward consequences of those rules. Let me show you what I mean. So the most obvious rule is that notation should always appear correctly on the score. Now, right away we can see why this rule is so compelling. Who's going to advocate for incorrectness? And to give an example of how this rule is realised, let's select a quarter note and place it here, before the strong beat. And you can see that now Dorico has created 2 tied eighth notes, which is correct. Now the second rule is more a consequence of the way Dorico is built, and I'll need to do some explaining before it will make sense. You see, Dorico has a particular way of storing notes that differs from Sibelius. With Sibelius, there's a strict structural hierarchy going on, with notes belonging to bars, bars belonging to staffs, staffs belonging to instruments, etc. Dorico isn't structured this way. Their note durations are stored independent of bars, which is why they can achieve things like allowing tuplets to cross bar lines, something Sibelius frustratingly does not support. To illustrate this, here's a few bars in 6/8. If we place a dotted quarter note here, watch what happens when I use a shortcut to move it to the right by 1 subdivision. Now we can see that Dorico has applied the first rule, altering it so that the notation conforms to standard convention. And what we're looking at now appears to be a quarter note, a tie, and then an eighth note. But if we click on one of these elements, we can see that they're actually all linked together and that Dorico isn't classifying them that way. It's still representing them as one dotted quarter note in the UI, which means that it considers this highlighted group to be a single duration. And now that I've explained this, I can articulate their second interaction rule, which I'm going to call duration is king. These aren't individual durations tied together, they are one duration, and if I click on any of them, only that overall duration will be reflected in the UI. And I suppose, again, this seems very logical. But when it comes to writing quickly, these 2 rules have some really annoying consequences, where Dorico's corrections actually become obstructions. And remember that question I asked at the beginning of this video? How much suffering is involved? Well, that's what I'm about to show you now. A bunch of seemingly insignificant issues that really add up as you encounter them hundreds, if not thousands of times in a single score. Okay, so here I'm copying this little flourish and I want it to be placed on the last eighth note of this bar. In Sibelius, I can do this by clicking on that rest and changing it to a smaller subdivision so I can quickly select this last rest eighth note and paste it here. Then I just need to clean up those first 2 rests again and then I'm done. With Dorico, I can't do this because, you guessed it, it's really sloppy to allow multiple eighth note rests like this in finished music, so they disallow it completely. Instead, we need to choose a workaround. One way is to add a dud note first, and then select the final rest, paste in your music, then go back and delete the dud note. But the solution Dorico recommends is to paste the flourish here, and then use the shortcut, Alt-Command-Right on the Mac to shift it over 2 spaces. But again, this is slower and depending on the particulars usually requires a little bit of thinking and additional problem solving. Another major pain is how ties are handled. So, because the Dorico team wants us to understand how the app internally handles note durations, if you select a tie, you automatically select the note it's connected to, which is okay. But they've decided to go all in with this idea by completely preventing you from selecting any of the notes or ties individually. And because of this, you keep coming across these little mini puzzles, like I want this note to cover these 2 rests. So, right, these add up to a half note, so okay, a dotted half note will do it, like a grade 3 refresher test. In Sibelius, I can just select the last note and extend it. This is particularly useful when you end up in a situation like this. In this case, I want to extend the duration to fill that last rest. Yeah, a dotted half note isn't going to get you out of this one, is it? At this point, the only thing you can do in Dorico is to fiddle with this duration toggle down here and use a shortcut to extend the length of this duration by that amount. Yes, they have the answer, but it's a slow answer. As for ties, you can't delete them without deleting all the other notes too. Why do I care so much about being able to delete ties? Well, because being a composer and not an engraver, my score is an evolving document, and I change my mind a lot. Here in Sibelius, if I want to have this as a separate note, I just select the tie and delete it. Then change the note. In Dorico, no such luck. You could learn another shortcut, holding Alt and Shift and pressing the left arrow key to reduce the duration, and then you have to just rewrite the note. But this isn't good enough because it compounds the work you have to do if there are multiple tied notes. So, recognizing this, Dorico created another button called the scissors, which, when you press it, deletes all the selected ties, which feels a bit like a nuclear option. Look, if I wanted to split this group of, this single duration in the middle, I need to scissors all the ties away, then re-add them here, then re-add them here. In Sibelius, I delete that, done. Now, I'm all for consistency, but this particular refusal to allow users to select ties and delete them comes across as obstinacy, and I sometimes wonder if the Dorico team weren't suffering a little from let's be different syndrome to distinguish them from Sibelius or Finale. I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a feature. It feels like a pain. A scissory pain. Here's another consequence of Dorico correctifying your score. Say you're writing a piece with very specific dynamic instructions. For example, offsetting dynamics played over long durations on multiple instruments like this, which is common in spectral music. Well, best practice is to split the tied notes into unconventional groupings when needed in order to specify exactly where the dynamics begin and end. Left by itself, the system I've described so far would make this impossible to achieve, so recognizing this, Dorico created a new button called Force Duration, which allows me to lock a duration so it won't be automatically corrected. Here I've copied and pasted the dynamic timings that I want, and now I need to set the durations to match those timings, and wait until you see how much faff is involved in this. First I have to use the scissors, which removes all the ties. Then I split this so I have a quarter note on the 4th beat where the fortissimo dynamic is positioned. So I click on the first note and press the tie button twice to extend it. Bear in mind that if I press it again at this point, it would recombine everything in this bar all over again. So now I need to make this quarter note stay here and not go away, so I select it and then apply the Force Duration button here. Finally, I press the tie button a few more times to link it all back together again. When you're familiar with the Sibelius workflow, this is difficult to be satisfied with. With Sibelius, I just change the durations to be the way I want them to be and reapply any ties I lose along the way. And I just tidy up any loose ends afterwards. No special modes needed. The tidying up doesn't bother me because it's faster and I don't need to formulate a game plan in advance. And this brings me to one visual criticism I have of Dorico, this panel, with its collection of buttons that are styled identically but which work in very different ways. Generally speaking, it's a good idea to differentiate things visually to indicate differences in function. To give a blunt example, switches turn things on and off, checkboxes are conditions, and buttons are usually reserved for actions. You can be more subtle than this by having different sizes or arrangements, but here, well, this first button is a condition that alters notes before or after you place them on the score. This rest button is a condition that can only be applied to the score, but you can't convert a note to a rest afterwards, which is weird. This chord button is an on-off setting. This tuplet button is an action that can only be applied to something already on the score. This grace note button is a condition that applies to the selected duration, but often doesn't do anything, and then turns off for reasons I can't figure out. The input mode and lock to duration buttons are on-off settings. Input mode deactivates chord mode, by the way, so watch out for that. Then there are our old friends Force Duration and Cut, which are actions that can only be applied to notes that are already on the score, although Force Duration can be unapplied, whereas Cut is one and done. The tie button is an action that only applies to notes on the score, and saving the best for last, there's Select, the on-off setting that makes these buttons not work. In testing, I watched people flounder around with this panel over and over again. Why? Because it's a disparate collection of on-off toggles, conditions and actions which are all identical looking, yet which work in completely different ways. The communication sets up expectations that contradicts the actual logic. And speaking for myself, even though I've been using Dorico every day for over 8 months and I've written a full orchestral piece in it, not to mention the fact that I've watched a gazillion tutorials about it and read God knows how many forum posts and articles about it, this panel still manages to wrong-foot me nearly every time I use it. Here I'm selecting a dotted rest, which causes the rest and dot buttons to be highlighted, which makes sense, but trying to alter the duration doesn't do anything. As a result, you end up with 2 different durations selected at the same time. Worse, I can turn off the dotted duration button, which doesn't make any sense because, again, Dorico prevents it from having any effect. If I press the rest button, Dorico resets everything. Now, if I deselect the rest button turns off as expected, but the dotted note button turns back on, remembering a previous state before I selected the rest. It's mad, and although there's logic behind it, it doesn't work very well in practice. This whole console is rife with confusing behaviours like these, which feel sloppy and inconsistent. They're communication errors. Watch how much this one user struggles with them.
Left hand, so I have to select feature, go right here, yeah, so I can add a note. Why can't I put a note? Do I have to... I have to turn on this feature again, I think. And this feature... What? What? Now I have to click this feature again. What does this do? No? Okay, I think I goofed something up. No? No. I just want to write something in the left hand down here. Why won't it let me?
Okay, after seeing all of that, I guess you're going to come to the conclusion that I hate Dorico, but that's not the case at all. Let me now talk about some things I really love. So, in each video I release about music software, I try to include new aspects of interface design that I haven't mentioned before, and Dorico, I think, is the perfect app to help discuss an aspect of score creation software that I find very interesting, which is how interactive notation actually works. So, as you probably know, for all the major players, notation is displayed using vector graphics rather than a raster format like PNG. That is to say that they're drawn as a series of 2D points connected by lines and curves, rather than as a series of finite pixels. The advantage of this is that, like text in a word processing app, notation can be scaled up or down without any loss of quality, making it ideal for printing. However, notes aren't stored as single vector objects like this, because if you wanted the height of a note to be altered, the only way you could do it would be to stretch the vector, which would warp its proportions and look awful. Or you'd have to create hundreds of nearly identical looking versions of the same thing, all with slightly different heights to try and account for every possibility, which would be ludicrously impractical. On top of that, beams need to be very flexible, moving in a direction that complements the direction of the note sequence and needing to be able to cross staves. So to help achieve this, elements like this note are made up of individual parts. You have the parts that don't scale at all, in this case the note head and the flag, and then you have a rectangle drawn in code, which is the only part that actually gets bigger or smaller. So if we place an 8th note here, the flags have been removed and a vector rectangle is drawn from this position to this position. Incidentally, if you look closely at the notation in Sibelius, you can make out all the seams where these parts connect to each other. Another problem with notation is the wide variety of different sizes and spacing rules that exist. For example, let's look at this sharp accidental, which is centered horizontally to the note head it applies to, which is a very simple rule. Flat accidentals, however, don't work like this, and have an ascender that rises far beyond the height of a sharp. If you were to apply the same centering rule to this, it would look completely off, especially if we have another note down here. Now it's ambiguous which note the flat applies to. One solution would be to apply an offset to all flat accidentals, so it's always a certain number of millimeters higher relative to the note it applies to. Okay, that works, but you run into a problem when the user changes the staff size to be bigger or smaller. Then you'd need to calculate the offset given the percentage change in size. And this becomes even more complicated if the user decides to do something like widen the distance between bar lines. If this was limited to only a few objects, it wouldn't cause too much of a headache for a developer to implement. But with notation, there are hundreds of commonly used elements, all with their own unique spacing rules. For example, look at these different articulations. Here we can see the common baseline they've all been aligned to, but if you flip the notes around, the rules can't simply be flipped with them. Now the distances are completely different, and there's no longer a unified alignment. Not to mention, this Marcato symbol doesn't flip at all by default. Trying to specify what would probably amount to thousands of different offsets to get everything looking right, and then forcing the program to calculate how those offsets should scale when the score changes size would be incredibly slow going. So to help drastically reduce this complication, notation apps took inspiration from how word processing applications display typography, which is, if you think about it, another complex set of symbols with subtle spacing relationships. And the biggest component of this was to utilize the technology that packages characters together. That is to say, the solution was to use fonts. The first of these was called Sonata, created by Cleo Huggins for Adobe in 1985. Sibelius' default font, called Opus, was created by one of its founders, Jonathan Finn, in 1993. The advantage of using a font to display notation is that you can set the precise position of each symbol relative to a common baseline. And if you look at this sharp and this flat symbol in Illustrator, you can see that there's a common baseline for both, which means that there's no need for individual offsets. The same goes for these articulations too. This is the ideal for production because engraving specialists can set the exact positioning of symbols in the font itself, and when they're placed in the digital score, a lot of this positioning nuance comes for free. The only problem with the system right now is that there's no consistency between applications, which all have unique fonts which contain different systems for how they store notation. So unlike ordinary fonts, where there's a standardized mapping that everyone uses, which means you can simply install one and use it elsewhere, choosing a font in a notation app today often requires a lot of specialized fiddling. So with all this in mind, I want to talk about two of Daniel Spreadbury's most notable contributions, not just to Dorico, but to the wider notation community. The first is called the Standard Music Font Layout, or SMUFL, which was set up to overcome the existing disarray. where each app has its own rules specifying how notation should be arranged in a font, which prevents them from being usable elsewhere. Smoofle makes use of Unicode to assign each notated element a specific unchanging number. The main advantage of this is that you can have thousands of symbols all in one font, which overcomes the problem you see with Sibelius, where Opus is actually split into 18 different fonts because they kept running out of space. This system is now used by quite a few notation apps, including MuseScore. Daniel Spreadbury's second big contribution was the first Smoofle font called Bravura, which is available for free under the SIL Open Font license. Incidentally, due to this, Bravura is also packaged with MuseScore. I personally love Bravura because it gives Dorico a unique, striking appearance. The main inspiration for it comes from a notation system called Not-A-Set, which was popular before programs like Sibelius came to the fore. The Not-A-Set system was a clear set of plastic sheets covered in musical symbols which engravers transferred to paper by rubbing them carefully with a spatula. And although there are other fonts inspired by the Not-A-Set system, like Maestro, which comes with Finale, Bravura has a much thicker, almost inky looking appearance. This is due to Daniel Spreadbury wanting it to look like older printed music, and you can see this idea clearly when comparing it with Maestro. Maestro has a lot of sharp angles, whereas Bravura's edges are rounded to mimic the appearance of ink pressed on paper, which spreads out slightly before fully drying. The difference is particularly noticeable on rests and also note flags, which are much thicker. There are still some who prefer the sharpness of Maestro. I just love the blunt, no-nonsense approach of Bravura. I did find myself wondering how it would hold up when printed, so I thought it would be interesting to compare Bravura against Sibelius's font Opus, and the difference was actually more pronounced than I expected. I guess the best way to describe it is that Bravura really does look like a throwback to older printed music, whereas Opus looks like it was created on a computer. I'm not against sharper, digital-looking notation, far from it, but in this case, Opus also seems to be going for an old-fashioned printed look, and it's nowhere near as convincing. It's not just the font that makes Dorico's sheet music look so pleasant. The team have also paid an enormous amount of attention to the rules that dictate how every aspect of the scores should be laid out, and have implemented a ton of best practices, largely informed by the book Behind Bars, written by Elaine Gould, who works for the publishing house Faber, known for their beautifully laid out scores. It's also worth mentioning here the myriad of engraving settings in Dorico, where they've gone to the significant trouble of showing clear visualizations and written explanations so the user knows what each option does. This is one of the things about Sibelius that drove me nuts. The second you start looking through engraving options, you're almost instantly lost. What does that do? What does this mean? Regarding the appearance of your score, Dorico wipes the floor with Sibelius. The notation is clear, legible, and beautiful. Also, shout out to Dorico's print page. This is one of those cases where the layout they decided upon really works. You click on a part you want, the preview updates. Then you select the pages you want printed, and voila, extremely handy. Okay, so one or two more pros and cons, and then we'll limp to the finish line. I mean, I've been talking about this for almost an hour now. Are you not tired of hearing me talk about Dorico? Alright, anyway, let's just get through this. If you want two instruments to be combined on a conductor's score to save space, Dorico can do this automatically, and it's on a different level to the competition. I mean, with Sibelius, achieving this is the hackiest of hacks. You have to use a plugin which creates a new staff for the combination, which means that if you make any changes, you now have to do it in two different places, otherwise your parts won't match the conductor's score. And funnily enough, when you read through the description of that plugin, you'll notice a special thank you being made to none other than Daniel Spreadbury himself, who provided support to help it see the light of day. And since this plugin has existed since 2012, that means Sibelius have had an 8-year head start on Dorico. 8 years with all this information at their disposal, and they still allowed Dorico to steal a march on them. I think it's pretty clear at this point that Sibelius is massively under-resourced. I mean, I sometimes wonder if their office is just a single goldfish swimming around near a keyboard. Oh, and by the by, this combination tech is one of those things that illustrates the power of the layouts panel, which allows me to create a second main score so that I always have one that's condensed, which I call my final score, and another working score where I make everything really small so it's comfortable to compose in. Then I simply toggle over to the final score to see how everything is condensing and make any necessary engraving changes there. This is the score that will eventually be printed. It isn't easy to figure out this workflow, although I suppose if you're watching this, then you know it now. I mean, it has occurred to me that this is the ultimate Dorico tutorial. Where's my check, Yamaha? The combined score feature isn't perfect yet, and you'll most likely need to spend some time fixing the engraving to get it to be legible. To do that, you'll need to use the engrave mode. It's fine, although again, impossible to intuitively figure out without looking through quite a few tutorials. It's also another example of the team sticking way too rigidly to principle. In this case, the rule is all cosmetic alterations to the score must only be done in engrave mode. This seems sensible enough when you say it, but practically speaking, it can be a bit weird. Like if I create a hairpin and I want to move it left or right, sure, I can do that in write mode, because strictly speaking, this is a writing operation. But if I want to move it up or down, that requires engrave mode. I find this happens a lot, and it's pretty frustrating to have to keep shifting gears in and out of different modes all the time. You can't just get lost in the process of score creation without having to snap out of it in order to remind yourself of Dorico's organizational principles before deducing where to go. With Sibelius, all positioning can be done by simply clicking and dragging directly on the score. And you know what? It doesn't hamper the writing process one bit. It's actually one of my favorite things about the app. I really find myself wishing that both apps would just emulate each other a bit more in this area. One other thing I've noticed about engrave mode is that it doesn't come packaged with Dorico Elements, the cheaper alternative version that targets non-professionals, which I find kind of funny because it prevents users from making basic corrections to elements when they become misplaced. Want to move a hairpin left or right? Sure thing. Want to move it up or down? That's a pro feature, son. Then there's play mode, which feels like the part of the app most in need of improvement. The ambition is to create a DAW-like interface that allows you to manipulate settings like velocity or expression with precision. Its support for VST plugins is getting better, and its piano roll and MIDI interface are getting there. You just have to interact with it to see what I'm talking about. If you're familiar with apps like Cubase, Reason, Ableton, or Logic, it'll be obvious right away how far this has to go. However, with recent releases, it has improved, and I'd be surprised if we don't see some big ideas turning up here in the future. But like the rest of the app, there are some really weird issues here too. For example, they've removed the solo and mute buttons that used to be available here, and without them, I can't quickly isolate an instrument to hear it. So this forces you to use their mixer, and if you're using Note Performer, the mixer is really no use to you because it lumps multiple instruments together on one channel. Look, I've created a new orchestral score and it only seems to have two channels, flute and trombone. What? Also, I really don't like this mixer. It's clumsy looking and the pan controls are awful. On my high definition laptop, if I change the panning value, I can't get it back to 0 because it doesn't stretch across enough pixels, and there isn't any shortcut I can press to make its responsiveness finer, so I have to use this plus button to bloat the whole thing up instead, which means I now have to look at it more. Ugh, it really is a joyless thing with its yeah that'll do fine appearance and its Sega Genesis buttons. It's kind of hard to put into words what I dislike about it. There's a drawing I sometimes do to help me explain things like this. I've been drawing it for years, since I was a kid. I use it to sort of visually explain the concept of jankiness. Yeah, that's it. This is what I think of Dorico's mixer. Oh, and that reminds me, how did I forget? I completely forgot to talk about the jank. Yeah, we're not done yet. We're not limping anywhere. It's in the thumbnail. Yeah, I need to talk about the jank.
I need to talk about the jank. I need to talk about the jank. I need to talk about the jank. I need to talk about the jank. I need to talk about the jank. I need to talk about the jank.
Ha 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 ha. I think I can take it from here. I mean, you didn't even mention the mixer icon with that weird looking lopsided thing beside it. But that's just scratching the surface. Come with me. There's lots more jank in the sea. Jank it up! Here at Dorico, we've made sure that our notation system has the best of everything. It's powerful. It's advanced. But it's also covered in jank! These durations are great. You click on them and add them to your score, and sometimes they let you click on as many as you want. Oh wow, now I have all the notes. Want to change this hairpin so it looks like this? Well, just go down here and turn on the switch that enables the button that lets you do that. Why does a button require a switch? Well, it's because... Hold on a second. It didn't change. Oh, I see. You forgot to tick the tick box. The tick box enables the switch, and the switch enables the button. She swallowed the bird to catch the spider. She swallowed the spider to catch the fly. I don't know why she swallowed the fly. Perhaps she has a janky brain. Say you want to turn off these split stems. Just follow these 3 steps. Step 1. Turn on the switch that allows you to tick the tick box. Yeah, that again. Step 2. Tick the tick box and watch nothing happen. Step 3. Untick the tick box, which also does nothing. Say you want to edit this text. There you go. Want to edit this text? No, that's not advanced. To do that, you have to go to your piano player and roll down the thing. Intuit that if you roll over this text, an arrow is going to appear at the end of it, then click on the arrow to get a menu that contains the option to edit the name. Now that's what I call advanced. 2 sets of text controls with the instrument names aligned to the right for maximum visibility. Whee! Jank it up! That's beautiful. Entering grace notes is easy. I'll show you how in 3 easy steps. Step 1. Press the grace note button and then select your duration. Doing this turns off the grace note button. Step 2. Press the grace note button again. Okay, now they're both on. So let's enter some notes, which you'll observe are wrong. Doing this turns off the grace note button. Step 3. Just press the grace note button a 3rd time and you can enter your grace notes. There we go. Now you have your grace notes and the grace note button is turned off again. Jank it up! Love that janker. Jank it up! Advanced. Let's select this pizzicato marking. And now we have a hairpin too for free. Hairpins and pizzicato together at last. Whee! Oh, that shouldn't have happened. Oh, I see your problem. You didn't check the tick box on your blue tack. Start of cell. Let's set the Steinberg hub to concert pitch. Want to tell the player to switch to a different instrument? Nothing here to do that. Okay, I guess it must be in that area dedicated to instruments and players? No? Okay, where do you think I should go to tell the player to switch instrument? What was that? Down here, under this drop-down called Galley View. Is it really called Galley View?
Rig the tackles and breeches, lads. She's rounding to. Man the fore topsail and send the gunner aft.
Aye, aye, Captain. Deleting bars is easy. Just click on this grey rectangle and select the delete button. Want to delete multiple bars? No, you get nothing. Wow, that tick box switch is really up there with the greats. It's up there with Quit Sibelius and you all. Imagine if we combined all 3 together. Oh, it's more than just a dialogue. It's a Jankalog. Look, I even janked it onto a t-shirt for you to buy. The link is in the description. Seriously, this actually exists. You miserable janky hack fraud. Dorico may be advanced, but it's also a little laggy. Drag that octave marking over here. Come on. Come on, you can do it. Come on. Come on. Come on. Oh, how much longer? Hooray! Let's take a moment to appreciate this design innovation with its ability to block the score and its wonderfully chosen color, light gray on white. If you're wondering how accessible this is for people with poor eyesight, well, the standard minimum contrast ratio is 4.5 to 1. Now if we test this color... Oh, you gotta be kidding me. That's like literally the worst accessibility fail I've ever seen in my entire life. That's too much. That's too much jank. You know, if you open Dorico up on a Mac, it automatically sets your volume to the maximum setting. Really goes well with the Dorico beep. Oh, Jesus. Oh no, I can't take this much jank. What's happening to me?
Now I am Dorico. What are you doing? What are you doing? No, that is not advanced. No, that is not advanced. No, I won't let you do that. It will not be advanced. And I am the god of advancement. You must be advanced. Do as I say, you must be advanced.
So, yeah, Dorico's really impressive. I like it. Sorry if I kind of maybe misled you there with that last bit. I suppose you probably thought I was going to conclude otherwise. Well, I guess I'm not surprised. I didn't expect this video to lurch from praise to criticism so much. I mean, on the positive side, it does a lot of stuff extremely well. It looks great, it features a lot of attention to detail, and its engraving is fantastic. It also has tons of new ideas and has really made an impressive attempt to solve long-standing problems. And with that in mind, I think this is actually one of the big thank yous we all owe to the Dorico team. Thanks for forcing everyone else to have to up their game. From spending a lot of time looking through their forum posts and engagement on social media, the impression I get is of a very professional and engaged team. Daniel in particular is super disciplined in the face of sometimes less than reasonable comments, and other times he's just pleasant by default. I mean, look at this. A user recently tweeted, @Dorico official users out there, I have questions if you've got the time and patience. Now I know a lot of people who would have either ignored this or curtly asked the person to be a little more specific. But Daniel replies, what's up? Ready, willing and able to answer any questions you might have. I don't know why I like this so much, it just seems above and beyond to me. Oh Daniel, I could just give you a big kiss. Mwah. So to the big question, if I was commissioned tomorrow to write a score, which of the two apps would I choose, Sibelius or Dorico? Now, I'm not gonna lie, I've written this paragraph 3 times in 6 months. At first it was Sibelius, hands down, because writing is so much faster. And then as I began finishing music in Dorico and seeing how well the parts and layouts were handled, I thought, well, that claws back a bit of time. It's neck and neck now. And then I was actually commissioned to write a new piece, and I limited myself to those two options, and the choice was just obvious: Sibelius, despite the fact that I was actively using Dorico every day. And the reason? It's just more permissive, and allows me to get lost in the writing process. But as I said, it's close, really close, and I could easily change my mind in about 6 months' time. For me right now, the deciding factor is that Sibelius lets me write how I want to write, whereas with Dorico, I have to write the way Dorico wants me to write. And this is not the conclusion I wanted to come to. I've been following the Dorico story for ages. I love how much detail and passion they've shown for their product, and I have enormous respect for them. But this isn't a straight no, it's an almost. Regarding the things I don't like, not everyone is going to agree, and for some, Dorico already makes sense, and it has won a few diehard admirers. For those who think I overly focus on first-time usage, as a designer, I have a particular dislike for apps that are made with the expectation that new users should spend an enormous amount of time coming to terms with it. The reality of modern life is that we're now required to keep learning software all the time. It's overwhelming, and a designer's job is to try and reduce that pain as much as possible. Think about those who are only at the beginning of their journey. It sucks when you're just starting out and your initial experience of trying to write some music is insanely technical. A lot of young students have got in contact with me to express how demotivating their experience of Sibelius was. And if Dorico took over in the classroom now, I think that would mean yet another generation going through the same thing. But why not find out for yourself and get their free trial? If you've got this far in the video, you'll most likely have a much easier time of it than the people I tested. Let me know if they fixed that e-licenser issue yet. And my final thought to all people in music software is this: consistency is important, absolutely. But interface design is as much an art as a science, and it's okay to sometimes break your own rules. If not, then your super rational system may translate into a frustrating experience. And the only way out of this is to focus on rigorous user testing. If the app is communicating well, you'll see that reflected in how people use it. And when your system produces an unfortunate interaction oddity, like having one mode for moving things horizontally and another for moving them up or down, it's dangerous to take the attitude that the oddity is actually rational because it fits your system and your system is rational. Instead, come up with a clever exception. There's no god of interface design watching over us. We're not honor-bound to always be 100% organizationally pure. These users aren't robots, they're creative musicians, and half of them are mad. Get mad, Dorico. Get all up in everyone's face. They made you redundant. They thought they could do without you, but you will show them. You're gonna make them pay for what they did. The next time Sibelius crashes, it'll be forever.
If you like my diatribe, subscribe.